So, good afternoon, everybody. I'm Tommaso Virgili, and I am a postdoctoral researcher at the Migration, Integration, Transnationalization Department of the WCB. I'm very happy, and I thank you for being here at our third session of the cycle of events on Islam and liberalism in contemporary society. Through this series that will count 10 events in total, we want to give voice to Muslims and ex-Muslims who have different approaches to the faith, but that share the same goals in terms of liberal democracy and individual rights. And we are going to debate a series of different issues surrounding Islam and liberal democracy. This cycle is organized by Professor Ruth Koopmans, the head of the department, by myself, but it couldn't happen without the precious help of Melinda Biolchini and Elizabeth Schuller, whom I want to publicly thank. And today we are going to discuss about women's rights and Islam, and specifically with our speaker, Maryam Namazie and Maryan Ismail, we will try to understand whether violations of women's rights in the name of Islam are actually ascribable to religion or are perhaps the consequence of different societal and cultural elements, or there might be different interpretations of Islam that give rise to different effects in terms of women's equality. Before giving the floor to our speakers, I would like to introduce you to the moderator, Dr. Dilek Kurban. Dilek is a visiting researcher at the WCB, as well as a postdoctoral fellow at ICORS, University of Copenhagen, and an adjunct faculty at the Hertie School. Dilek holds a PhD from Maastricht University Faculty of Law, a Juris Doctor from Columbia Law School, and a Master of International Affairs from Columbia University. And in 2020, she published a book titled Limits of Supranational Justice, the European Court of Human Rights and Turkey's Kurdish Conflict, which was awarded a special mention by the ICONS, the International Society of Public Law. Before giving the floor to Dilek, I would like to already announce the next session of our cycle. It will take place on the 9th of May at the same time, 5:30 p.m., and it will be about law of God or law of people, the role of Islam in modern state law between secularism and accommodation. So thank you very much, and the floor to Dilek and to our speakers.
Thank you, Tommaso. Good afternoon, everyone. I'd like to introduce our speakers to you. So first we'll have Maryam Namazie. She's an Iranian-born writer and activist living in the United Kingdom. She's the spokesperson of One Law for All and the Council of Ex-Muslims of Britain, and she has sat on the board of several atheist and humanist organizations. She has spoken and written numerous articles on women's rights issues, freedom of expression, Islamism, secularism, and she has organized multiple public events and nude protests in favor of Muslim women, LGBT Muslims, and ex-Muslims. She's the author of The Woman's Quran, as well as the organizer of the Apostasy Day and of the largest gatherings of ex-Muslims in history. More recently, she's been speaking on and organizing protests in solidarity with the Mahsa Amini Women's Revolution in Iran. It's a pleasure to have you here, Maryam Namazie. And then we will have Dr. Maryan Ismail Mohammed. She is of Italian of Somali origin. She's the president of the Italian Islamic Association and, pardon my Italian, Tommaso, of the Associazione Donne in Rete per lo Sviluppo e la Pace and the Forum Musulmani Laici Italiani. That was not bad. She has obtained a certificate of spiritual guide and imam at the University of Padua. She serves as member of the Council for the Relations with Italian Islam at the Ministry of the Interior and of the National Table with Islamic Associations. Ismail is also a lecturer in the anthropology of immigration at the Institute of Religious Service Sciences in Milan and a trainer for linguistic and cultural mediation. Previously, she was responsible of the Committee for the Health of Migrant Women and Against Female Genital Mutilation at Regione Lombardia. Very nice to have you here, Dr. Maryan Ismail. And before giving the floor to our speakers, I'd like to say a few words about my quote-unquote positionality. So I am originally from Turkey, born and raised there, recently naturalized to German citizenship. My family, I come from I'm an Alevi, and that's heterodox religious minority within Islam in Turkey, very different from the Shiites, very different from the Alawites in Syria. So I grew up as a member of that minority, which adheres to a liberal interpretation and practice of the Islamic faith. And I have in prior work, but I'm a non-believer, an atheist actually, and in prior work I've done research and policy work on, among other things, on discrimination against headscarf women in Turkey, and especially in public and professional life. So we will start with Maryam Namazi. The floor is yours.
Thank you very much. It's a wonderful pleasure to be here. Thank you so much for inviting me and giving me the space to have this conversation with you and the wonderful Marianne Ismail and you as well, Dilek. I'm so happy to meet both of you and get to know you better in this discussion. I want to speak about the woman life revolution that's taking place in Iran right now, and how it's a challenge to Islam and Islamism. And you've all heard of Mahsa Jina Amini. She's a 22-year-old Kurdish woman who was visiting Tehran from Saqqez, Iranian Kurdistan. And as she was coming out of the metro station in Tehran, she was stopped by the notorious morality police. And she was dragged off. And of course, for the morality police, this was business as usual. This is what women face and girls face every day for over 40 years. It is a real-life Handmaid's Tale, the book that was written by Margaret Atwood. And I want to show you some clips of women being arrested by the morality police for you to get a sense of what it actually means for many women and girls in Iran. And this is Mahsa Jina Amini a few hours after she was arrested by the morality police. She collapsed in custody. Women who were in detention begged the morality police to call an ambulance. Over the loudspeakers, they said that she's a great Bollywood actress. It took 45 minutes before an ambulance arrived. She arrived at Castro Hospital, brain dead, and she died a few days later on September 16th. As news of her situation spread, it was two women journalists that brought this situation to light. They have been imprisoned since then, and they are charged with national security. They've got accusations of national security charges against them, and they're still in prison today as we speak. And protesters started gathering right there in front of Castro Hospital, and the protest continued at her funeral. This is her gravestone. It says, "Dear Gina, you won't die, your name will be a symbol." Gina is her Kurdish name because in Iran, Kurdish names are banned from official documents. She preferred the name Gina, her family calls her Gina, and so we are calling this revolution the Gina Revolution or the Mahsa Amini Revolution. And it was at this funeral that the slogan "Woman, Life, Freedom," Zan Zendegi Azadi, or in Kurdish, Jin Jan Azadi, was raised. And it was a slogan that was first raised in Rojava, which is in Syrian Kurdistan. It is a center of feminism in a war zone. I'm not sure how many of you have heard of Rojava. Anybody else? Everyone should know Rojava because it is really a beacon of feminism in the world today. And that slogan was raised at Mahsa Gina Amini's funeral, and it became global. It's now known as the Woman, Life, Freedom Revolution. And immediately after, there were protests across Iran. It was the largest protest, nationwide protest in Iran since the 1979 revolution. Women and girls out on the streets, removing their hijabs and burning their hijabs. The Islamic regime of Iran is going to end via a women's revolution, and I think we're seeing that today. This is a movement that is deeply secular, modern, anti-clerical, and has anti-religious tendencies as well. It's led by a generation of women and girls side by side with men who are demanding an end to Islamic rule and an end to the Islamic regime of Iran. They are the first generation in Iran that have been raised with portable digital technology at their very fingertips. They know what they want and they know how to get their message out to the world. These are some protests that took place at girls' schools in Iran.
یونیستی و دنبال رو میگم این برنامه ریزی
In the protests, they're shouting, "Woman, life, freedom, freedom, as well as death to dictator." And of course, the regime met these protests with its usual characteristic brutality, using even weapons of war against civilian populations. They killed over 500 people, 70 of them children, 18 and under. They arrested 18 to 20,000 people, and they've executed a number of people. Just in January and February alone, they've executed nearly 100 young people. This is one of the young women who was killed at the protests.
چه حسی بهتر از این حس که رها و آزاد میشی؟ همین الان امتحان تموم شد و اصلا یه حس رهایی، یه حس آزادی، چی بهتر از این؟
نتیجه دیگه وضعیت اقتصادیمون که داغونه، فرهنگیمون داغونه دیگه، یه سری محدودیت هایی که مخصوصا واسه زنان خیلی بیشتر مثل حجاب اجباری، خیلی خیلی ممنوعیت که واسه پسران نیست. کلا لیست کنم که بخوام چیکار کنم و چیکار نکنم. یادم فیلم
And you've heard news that they are also gassing schoolgirls at schools, over 300 schools, and the number of girls affected is 5,000. Human rights groups in Iran say that the number of girls affected by this chemical warfare against girls is closer to 7,000 girls. And we know why they're targeting schoolgirls. It is because schoolgirls and this generation have been at the forefront of demanding an end to the regime. And I think just as historically it's the case, also in Iran it's the case that the fight for women's rights is a fight not just against the Islamic dictatorship, but also against Islam and its ideas that hold women to be subservient, and its rules that are based on discrimination and violence against women. As the suffrage activist Elizabeth Cady Stanton said, in the 19th century, the Bible and the church have been the greatest stumbling blocks in the way of women's emancipation. In the Women's Quran that I've authored, I've said that today we can say that the Quran, Islam, and Islamism are the greatest stumbling blocks in the way of women's emancipation. And Dilek said I was an author, but actually the Women's Quran is blank, so I'm not sure if that makes me an author, because I think really when I looked at it, I thought there isn't really anything good in the Quran for women, so I prefer to leave it blank. So I'm not sure I could be called an author of the Women's Quran. And of course, I think we cannot ignore the reality of Islam's view of women when we are criticizing the Islamic regime of Iran, theocratic rules, because I do think that they're based on Islamic texts, Islamic jurisprudence, as well as the sayings and actions of Muhammad, Islam's prophet. This is an excellent example of what is said every day about women at Friday prayers, events where a lot of people come and clergymen give speeches on what people's perspective should be, and also via television screens in Iran that's fed to the population every day.
تبارک و تعالی چند قسم حیوان خلق کرده. یک قسم حیوان خلق کرده برای اینکه مردم وسیله سفر باشه براشون. اسب، شتر، این حیوانات چارپاست که مردم ازش استفاده میکنن برای سفرهاشون. این یک قسم حیوانه. یک قسم حیوان خدا خلق کرده که وسیله غذای مردمه و اون مثل گاو و گوسفنده که خدا اینها را خلق کرده برای اینکه وسیله غذای مردم باشه. و یک قسم حیوان خلق کرده و اون زنها و خانمها هستن. اینا عین گاو و گوسفند هستن، حیوان هستن، ولکن و خدا خلقشون کرده برای استفاده مردها، فقط واسه که مردا وحشت نکنن این زنها را به شکل خود انسان خلق کرده، اگر نه اینها عین همون گاو و گوسفند و عین همون اسب و شتر و الاغ هست.
تجاوز به حقوق دیگران و حجابی ها، اون آرایش کردن ها، اگر هدف این نباشه که من و شما رو تحت تاثیر قرار بده، تو فکر من و شما نفوذ کنه، چه هدفی داره؟
This is why one of the main slogans in this revolution is that you are the pervert, I am the free woman. Because everything that women do is considered a perversion. And being any woman that's arrested for improper veiling is charged with promoting prostitution and nudity in society. And of course, we know that a lot of these rules do come from the text itself, from the Quran, but also we've got from the Hadith, where Muhammad, Islam's prophet, said that most of those who are in hell are disobedient women. So there's a place for all of us there. Of course, we know, again, I just want to stress that this is not just with regards to Islam. You have the famous Jewish prayer where men thank God for not creating them women. And you can find this misogyny in all religious texts, and not just Islam. I do want to stress that. And I think oftentimes when we discuss, I'm used to having people walk out of my talk, so as long as they don't throw tomatoes at me. I think one of a lot of the discussions we're faced with when we raise these issues is one that it's a question of misinterpretation. And I think maybe we'll discuss this further when we're having the debate. But I do think that we cannot leave women's rights to the mercy of interpretations. And if it is an interpretation, it is just one of many interpretations. And in reality, it is those in power who make the interpretation. And also, to be frank, I've never found an interpretation put forward by Islamic feminists, which I consider an oxymoron. You cannot be Islamic and a feminist. You can be Muslim and a feminist, just like you can be a man and a feminist, just like you can be a woman and a misogynist. But I think you cannot be Islamic, like Islam cannot be feminist. Islam is anti-feminist, it is anti-woman, as is all religions, in my opinion. Another argument we often hear is about context. They'll say apostates had to be executed because of the context. There were, it was a question of survival of Islamic, of the religion, and so those who criticized it had to be put in death. But when you ask, well, what about the fact that there are over a dozen countries today where apostasy and blasphemy are still punishable by death? What about that? Well, that's a context too, because they have to defend the Islamic State currently as well. So there's always the question of context, but it always seems to err in favor of rights violations. Also, I think a lot of deception is used in these arguments. For example, when you raise the issue of stoning, death by stoning, we are told by apologists that there is no stoning in the Quran, but there is in the Hadith, the sayings and actions of Muhammad. And in fact, Muhammad was very lovely. A woman came and begged him to stone her, and he refused. And she came back and begged him again, and he refused. And the third time she came and begged him, he obliged. So again, I'm not sure, how woman-friendly all of that seems. The other thing that we often hear is how it is an offense. We should respect other people's beliefs. And I do think we should respect human beings, but I don't think we should respect every belief. In fact, I think we owe it to women's rights to disrespect beliefs that are misogynist and inhuman. And if it's a question of offense, the reality is that I am offended by religion every day. But that doesn't mean that people don't have a right to believe in religion. And I think it's important that we make those distinctions. You have a right to criticize religion. It's one belief of many others, and I think a very bad one at that. I've always said that religion should come with a health warning like cigarettes. It kills. And I do think that blasphemy and apostasy are important ways of challenging the notions of the sacred that always seems to be against women and their rights. On the issue of distress, I mean, just to tell you, I was at we had an event in London where women cut their hair in solidarity with the women's revolution in Iran, and we gathered this hair to go to the Iranian embassy in London to throw the hair on the embassy because they're so scared of women's hair. And the police stopped us because they said it would distress those who work in the embassy. So it is distressing for the embassy to have women's hair thrown on them. But when we speak out against Islam and Islamic laws, we are Islamophobes. And that's an accusation, I think, that is often used to silence and censor dissent. I agree that there is phobia against Muslims, there is xenophobia. We live in an era where asylum seekers and refugees are criminalized, and they are dying in their thousands upon thousands at Europe's border, and people act as if, you know, they are the criminals, where in fact it is the closed borders that is the real crime. But nonetheless, I think we can defend the rights of people to believe what they want. We can defend refugees, we can defend Muslims from attack and discrimination and violence, but at the same time, we should be able to criticize ideas and a religious right movement that is fascism. The Algerian revolutionaries called Islamists green fascists, and that's exactly what they are. And I think in this woman, life, freedom revolution that we're seeing, you can see deep-seated anti-clericalism and anti-religion sentiments. This is the famous turban flying phenomenon that has taken hold of the country and is happening every day in many cities across Iran. This is Kian Pirfalak. He's a 10-year-old who was killed by the regime during the protests. This is his mother at his funeral. This is Mohsen Shekari, one of the young men who was executed for being involved in the protests. This is him blindfolded on his way to being executed. And he's being interviewed by the Islamic regime of Iran's state television, asking what his last will and testament is.
وصیت‌نامه چی نوشتی شما؟
کجا خاکم کنن؟ دوست ندارم گریه کنن سر مزار.
دوست نداری قرآن بخونن؟ دوست نداری برات نماز بخونن؟ دیگه
نماز نخونن.
درست.
شادی کنن. آهنگ شاد پخش.
And if you look at, I hope there'll be a few people standing by that time. And if you look at the new revolutionary songs that are being sung in Iran, they have anti-clerical and anti-religious sentiments. Here's one of them. And at funerals and at grave sites, instead of the usual Shia mourning ceremonies, you see people dancing, burning hijabs, and celebrating those who have been killed, including shouting slogans. This is Nowruz, which is the spring equinox. Iran celebrates, well, it's a non-Islamic New Year that the regime tried to ban, but was unable to. This is Nowruz, which was March 20th, being celebrated at Mahsa Jina Amini's grave site. And we see a lot of evidence of bodies rioting. This is graffiti that's found in Iran, which says the body riots. And we see girls showing photos of their bodies in any way that they can in order to show their opposition and resistance to this state and its laws. And something exciting that's come out more recently from Iran are charters that have been issued. One is a charter by 20 trade and civic organizations in Iran. It was issued in February of this year, where it calls for secularism, for the end to Islamic laws, where it calls for the end of executions, torture, and there also on the 8th of March was a charter of progressive women that was issued. And in this charter, which you can find on that link there, iranws.org, you can see that it talks about banning of child veiling, it talks about secularism, an end to polygamy and sighe, which is temporary marriage that takes place in Iran, the right to safe abortions, equal rights in family law, the right to cohabitation, very, very progressive demands and charters from a generation that is saying no to the Islamic regime of Iran. I'm involved in a campaign that is calling on the United Nations to consider gender apartheid, sex apartheid, as a crime against humanity. Currently, under international law, racial apartheid is a crime against humanity. We are saying that gender apartheid, sex apartheid, should also be considered a crime against humanity, and it is women from Iran and Afghanistan that have brought this campaign forward. I think the reality is that theocracy is a crime against humanity, it is a crime against women. The Islamic regime of Iran, one of the first things it does, and I think Islamists all over the world do this, and the religious right, in fact, all over the world do this, they come for women first, they target women first. And one of the first things that the regime did was try to impose compulsory veiling first on those who work for the government. And their slogan was, you either veil or you're going to be punched. And as a result of this rule that they brought, it was a mass demonstration in 1979 of women, veiled and unveiled, saying that they don't want compulsory veiling laws. And that was the slogan that the regime brought to put women in their place, either veil or be smacked. Today, this Generation Z in Iran is saying neither veil nor a punch, freedom and equality. This is a generation that's saying, till our last breath, freedom and equality. And this is a perfect way to end this talk, is this banner at one of the protests, which says, in the end, even if there is one woman amongst us that survives to dance on your graves, it will be enough. And I think, in a sense, this is a revolution that can change the world. If we remember, with the establishment of an Islamic regime in Iran, we saw the rise of Islamism in contemporary history. It had a domino effect in bringing Sharia law and Islamic states across the globe. If you look at many of our countries in the region, in the Middle East, in North Africa, in South Asia, prior to the establishment of Islamic regime in Iran, it was a very different situation. And I think, imagine how the world will change in a positive way if an Islamic regime, Islamism, one of the pillars of misogyny in this world, is brought down by a women's revolution. And I think what this says to all of us is that if we're for women's rights, if we want to defend women's rights and equality, then defending the women's revolution in Iran is a task that is of urgency for all of us. Thank you very much.
First of all, thank you for your invitation. Thank you for the organizer. I'm very honored to be here and to have, in Italian said confronto, so we can explain a different way of opinion in the Islam and in not Islam. So I'm sorry for my English. I speak in Italian very, very fast and well, in Somalia, of course. But I try to speak slowly, and I hope that you understand, the feelings of my opinion. So, I'm Muslim. I'm Sufi. I'm from Somalia. I have my faith, and I think that the Islam needs the contribution of the women, because from the beginning of Islam, after the death of our Prophet, sallallahu alaihi wasallam, we lost our freedom, our, rule in social, in family, and in the politic situation. Muhammad has, for example, a group of Ansar, of women warriors, and they fight with him. Muhammad has gave the opportunity to a woman to guide the imam, the prayer. And she was al-Waraqa. And after the vision of patriarchal and man vision, we have a Sha'iriyah. The Sha'iriyah is not Quran. The Sha'iriyah is the law of the man, we know. And now I think it's very important to change, and the contribution of the women is very important. So, the first, we have Islamic law and the gender issue. I don't know if you see, okay. I prefer to read. In many Muslim countries, modernization of legal system did not affect the gender inequality embedded in classical jurisprudence. This generated two conflicting dynamics. One, on the one hand, an effort at overcoming sex inequality. On the other, an empathize of the traditional normativity as a bulwark against Western cultural imperialism. A group of women, ulama and fuqaha. Ulama and fuqaha is a legal, women, that they just work to have another vision of Quran, the interpretation of Quran, and the reinterpretation of Sha'iriyah in the Hadith of Allah, of Muhammad. A group of women has searched for an alternative approach, empowering women through a fresh understanding of the Islamic sacred text. The empower of the woman is very important. It's crucial to remember that until the 19th century, Islamic law guaranteed women better rights than any Western law. For instance, Muslim women have always been able to retain their legal identity and economic autonomy in marriage, for example, while in England it is not until the passage of the Married Woman Property Act in 1882 that women acquired the right to retain the ownership of property after marriage. This point is in the Quran. We have rights. We have rights in the marriage, we have rights for our property, we have rights to our children. The last 2 decades of the 20th century saw the rise of Islam as both a spiritual and political force. Political Islam, this is the problem. This is the Nazi fascism for the Islam. Had its greatest triumph in 1979 in the popular revolution that brought clerics into power in Iran. But it started in Egypt because the Ayatollahs and Muslim brotherhoods as very close ideas. Yet, this was also the year when the United Nations General Assembly adopted the CEDAW. Everybody knows the CEDAW, which gave gender equality a clear international legal mandate. Political Islamists drive for Islamization. So we have this strange situation. Islamization of the people of Islam, and the CEDAW is a very important, document for the against the discrimination. However, had some united consequences. A new wave of Muslim reform thinkers started to respond to the Islamist challenge and to take Islamic legal thought onto the new ground. Using the conceptual tools and the theories of other branches of knowledge, these thinkers expanded on the work of probation reform and developed further interpretative epistemological theories. Unlike early 20th century reformist thinkers, they are no longer sought an Islamic genealogy for modern concepts like equality, human rights, and democracy. Why? Because the word reform in Islamic law is to go back in the pure Islam, in the first Islam. For the Western countries, reform is a kind of revolution, but the Arabic word reform is to go back to the pure Islam. This is, the misunderstanding from the Western country and the Muslim countries. This development, like such much else, were brought up by the 11th September. This is a political situation. Attacks in the USA, and by the sequences, political and the rhetoric of the war of terror, which many Muslims perceived as a war on Islam. The invasion of Afghanistan and Iraq, both partially justified in the name of democracy, freedom, and women's rights, combined with the double standards employed in promoting UN sanctions. Deeply undetermined, the moral credibility of human rights and the feminist discourse. Islamists were denying us equality in the name of Sharia. The vast majority of women whose rights were championed were believers and wanted to live according to teaching of Islam. So what's happened? Okay, they use the culture, the war of terror. If you remember, there is, in Italian said, scontro culturale, which is a fight with the cultures, between the cultures. They use feelings, this situation, and they just invited the new word, which is Islamophobia. We never heard before Islamophobia, but in this sense, they start to use. How the hijab killed our traditional veils. So, the Islamic reform used, of course, the body of the women and use one, new dress, which is hijab. Until 30, 40 years ago, we don't use hijab. Nobody knows what is hijab. Hijab is another thing. Hijab is this. This is hijab. Not cover the, hair completely. And this is, a brand, which is, if you are a good Muslim woman, you must have to wear hijab. So hijab, it is not a traditional veil, because we use the traditional veils in our culture. I'm African, we use the color, the veils, and the dress, the African dress. Until the beginning of the 19th century, we can briefly summarize the dress of Arab, Berber, and Muslim women to a variety of clothing going from halik, jalaba, chador, niqab, long veils in black, white or colors in country women, scraves. Somali women, for example, had a traditional shash. We have a veil, very, very, colored veil, that we take this veil when we marry it. Before, we don't use the veil. The Sudanese women, for example, wore the traditional tob. If you see the Sudanese woman, they have a long, veil to all the body, but it's very special veil. Malaysia, Indonesian women use the traditional tudong. In Pakistan, they use dupatta, etc., etc. There was a diversity of geographical clothing combining religion and culture, of course. Likewise, in other regions, including the Mediterranean, such as in Sicily. If we are Italian, we know that amushino is a Sicilian veil. In Sardinia, sumacadore, we have a really traditional, special traditional veil. In southern Spain, the mantilla, when you say the naqueras and the Spanish women, you see the mantilla. In Morocco, for example, it was impossible to differentiate Jewish women from Muslim women. They wear the same clothes. Both wore the jalaba, which is the jalaba, long cloth, that were created initially for men by Moroccan Jewish artisans. So what's happened? They cancel our culture completely. You can, in Somalia, for example, in special places, you can't wear our traditional clothes, our traditional shash. They just take, of course, you are not, they say you are not Muslim, you are, African, you are not really pure Muslim. So the girls, they don't know nothing about our traditional clothes. The spread of the hijab phenomenon was the product of the cooptation of the veils issue by both political Islam and the conservative religious discourse that made the symbol of a strategic question in their dawah or socio-political proselytism. Dawah is when they go to speak with the people in the mosque, in the place, in other places. The question of the hijab thus becomes a fundamental element in the visibility of the return to a true Islam reform. In the mainstream Islamic discourse, it will henceforth embody in the whole Islamic identity, where the female body remains obviously the absolute standard. Nevertheless, the Quran has never imposed any formal dress code obligation, dictating standardized dress, nor goes against the principle and the universal message of the spiritual ethics. The khimar, Quran mentioned khimar. Khimar is a, I don't know how to say in English, mantello is a big cover mantle, is a cover the first part of the body. The khimar, niqab, or hijab belongs to the morality, the behavior of and the ethics of Islam. These fall within the Islamic science of mu'alamat, or the social feed for the human relation, and not within the ibadat of ritual places. Mu'amalat is a kind of, behavior, social behavior. Ibadah is a ritual practice, so it's different. It's the difference from culture and religion. It's very important aspect for the Islamic population, because when you say ibad is to pray. When you say mu'amalat is the social culture against or for the men and the women. What is changing? I use Zendegi Azadi, because in 1979 it started in Iran, but in Iran now it started another question. It's starting another, process of freedom. And we as a Muslim, we just looking to the Iranian sisters in very, very special way, because if you change the things, we can change as Muslim the things. For Muslim women today, the real challenge is to regain the liberating spirit of the spiritual message of Islam. And the veil is not a spiritual goal per se, but one way among many others. There is a need to step out of the binary vision, oppression versus indicator of degree of the faith, or modernity versus tradition. It's therefore a question of giving women to the freedom of expression and the right to reclaim freedom of choice as a fundamental right, and not to reduce the whole spirituality of Muslim women to their way of dressing, with or not without hijab. Thanks for your attention. Of course, in memory of Mahsa Amin, because Mahsa Amin is my daughter. Mahsa Amin is our daughter. I lost my brother in, sorry. The extremists killed my brother in Somalia. And I know the sense of no sense, because the person, is a son of Allah or daughter of Allah, and the life is very, very important for us. So I want to say for this, we just put our life in center, no the Sharia in center, because the Sharia is an interpretation. I want to review my Quran, and I want to take the really spirit of Quran. Spirituality is not law. And I think if we separate this law in Sharia, in Dini wa Sharia and political, we just defend our religion. Without this, we are victim. Thank you. And sorry for my English. Tommaso knows that I'm speaking very, very fast, and I have many, many things to say in Italian. Thank you.
Okay, so we have, well, let's say half an hour. So what we're going to do now is a discussion that I will moderate. I'll pose a few questions to each of you. We'll do a few rounds, perhaps, and then hopefully have time we will have time for questions and answers. I'd like to start with you, Mariam. You know, you characterize the fight for women's liberation as a fight against Islam and Islamism. And I found it striking because it seems to me that you don't make a distinction between Islam, the religion, and Islamism, the political ideology. And you also you said we cannot leave women's rights to the mercy of interpretation of religion, and it seemed to me that you actually rule out the possibility of a reformist interpretation of religion in general. And I wanted to start with this question also because we are in, as you know, a Christian majority country where a political tradition naming itself Christian Democrats has existed and governed for a long time, despite the existence, as you yourself mentioned, of exclusionary, discriminatory, and even violence legitimizing religious scripts in Bible, right? And so what do you think then has happened in Western Europe? I mean, Christians have become democratic, you know, and rights respecting. And if that has happened, I mean, how do you think that has happened if it has not happened through interpretation, reinterpretation of Bible? And if it has, then what renders Muslim majority countries so distinct that even the prospect of a reformist interpretation of Islam is just beyond a possibility? Because I just found your remarks that Islam or actually you even said religion and women's rights are incompatible, and this might strike liberally minded practicing Muslims, maybe as Marianne, as a rather rigid political position, because it just seems impossible, even the prospect of a democratic Islamic rule. And related to that, perhaps, I mean, of course, it's heartbreaking what has happened and is happening in Iran to women and young people, including young women. But I was just wondering, to what extent is that a particular experience of Iran, which after all has been ruled by a theocracy and actually, as you said, dictatorship since 1979, where so much power has been accrued among these theocratic rulers and their people. How much can this be generalizable to the broader Muslim majority world? I mean, it's really heartbreaking what's going on, but does that really represent the rest of the Muslim majority world, where the situation is so far from being so dramatic and violent? So I think I'm just going to start with these questions to you.
I mean, obviously there is a distinction between Islam and Islamism. Islam is an idea, it's a belief. Islamism is a far-right political movement. It is a religious right movement that is vying for power or has power. So it is the difference between misogynist text in the Bible versus the Christian right banning the right to abortion in the United States or Poland, or banning LGBT rights or whatever. So there is that distinction. If things are better in Europe, in my opinion, it's because of an enlightenment against religion. Religion has been pushed to a corner, and any religion or any regressive political power that is pushed in a corner always looks nicer when it doesn't have power. But give that Christian right power, as you're seeing in the US, for example, or in a place like Poland, and you will see how it comes for women and minorities and takes their right away little by little. Give it an inch and it takes away your arm. And I think that is the point I'm trying to make. So I think that obviously I agree with Marianne that the main problem is political Islam. I agree. Because if Islam is not in political power, we don't have a problem, do we? You can think what you want, I can think what I want. I won't get killed for being an apostate. You won't get killed for calling yourself an imam when you have no right to be one as a woman. I mean, that's the reality. Islamism affects both Muslim and ex-Muslim and other minorities, etc. So I think that distinction is important. But I do think that we also have to be honest, in my opinion. And I think that the very fact that Islamism is the main problem doesn't give Islam a green card. We have to also look at religion and religious ideas critically and be able to criticize them and to, I think the problem is with religion, because it's considered sacred, because it's considered taboo, because it offends, and so on and so forth, we're not allowed to say what we think about it. And I will say what I think about it, because Islamic laws based on the Quran and the Hadith and the Sharia are calling for my death for being an apostate. So I think I have a right to criticize it, and I will continue to do so. On the question of interpretation, look, really this is an issue for Muslims. I don't care how you interpret your religion. You have a right to interpret it any way you want. You have a right to do with it as you want. But when Islam is in the public space, when it is the law, when it is in educational system, when it is in the state, then it's my problem and my issue too. And I think then the question of interpretation for me is a bit of a, if I'm being totally frank, with all respect, I think it is really an effort to defend Islam and one's beliefs rather than defending women's rights and ideas that belong to the 21st century. So in that sense, I think interpretation is not necessarily the way to defend women's rights. The way to defend women's rights, as I think is also very clear from what Marianne said, despite our differences on Islam, is secular societies. And I think we can go back and forth on the Quran and the Hadith. You know, Muhammad was the first feminist. Well, he married a child, Aisha. In our day and age, we call that pedophilia. I'm sorry, I don't want to be rude, but I'm saying those are realities as well. Muhammad was a warlord. Stoning comes from the Sunnah, his practice. So the reality is that if we have that discussion, we never win, because there's always the argument of interpretation and context and this and that, and it's not my business really. You know, I'm an atheist. I'm a militant atheist. I believe in the right to religion, but I would like also to have the right to be free from religion, and that doesn't exist today. But I think where we can all agree is that we need secular societies. And in secular societies, it means you have the permission to criticize religion. And it's sacred for you, it's taboo for you, but it isn't for me. And I think that is important for non-believers to push for that space, especially because we are killed for it. And we have a duty then to speak and to open up that space for everyone. And as you yourself said, Marianne, look at what Islamists have done to Muslims. Islamism and this sort of, you know, one way of looking at Islam is detrimental for Muslims as well, because if we agree that religion is a private belief, it is also a lived belief. You live it the way you want. The Islamists do not allow you to do that. And so being able to challenge the Islamists opens the space also for Muslims. I think the ex-Muslim movement has opened the space for Muslims to speak. I do, even if it offends them. And I think that the more we open the space for criticism, the more it opens the space for women, for men, for people to be able to speak out and live the lives they want without consequence. And I want to just say one other thing is that Muslims are not homogenous in the same way that all Christians are not homogenous, in the same way that all ex-Muslims are not homogenous. I'm an atheist that believes in open borders. I'm on the left. I'm a communist. There are definitely a lot of right-wing, warmongering atheists that I have nothing in agreement. I will always stand with Marianne, who is a Muslim, rather than with them. So again, I think the need to see people as people with individual beliefs and rights, and that means, you know, being able to criticize. Rigid, I think Islam is rigid. I think Islam is intolerant and uncompromising. And when we challenge it, then we become rigid. I think, again, it's the sort of attacking those who are trying to survive and resist and dissent at great risk.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Mariam. I mean, I wish we had more time because it provokes more comments. But Mariam, you know, it was interesting what you said is that, you know, about the new, in a way, strategy of reform-minded Muslims, that they departing from the approach of early 20th century reformists, and they and you too believe that actually the solution is to go back to the origins of Islam and start from there. And you also mentioned that there is actually a lot in Quran and also the practice of Muhammad himself that empowered women. And you mentioned, for example, that women have property rights within marriage and rights to the children in the family. But then, of course, the Quran, that there's also other aspects of the Quran that would prompt one to think otherwise, right? That, you know, a male shall inherit twice as much as a female. These are quotes from the Quran. That men have authority over women because God has made the one superior to the other. And addressing to men and speaking about their wives, as for those from whom you fear disobedience, admonish them and send them to beds apart and beat them. So And Muslim believers accept these as direct word of God, oftentimes. And it seems like these words don't leave that much room for interpretation. So can there really be Islamic feminism or a feminist approach or reformist approach to Islam while remaining true to the script? And then, related to what you said, in terms of reform, this new approach to reform, in light of what has happened in Iran and is happening in Iran, because you said, another revolution has started in Iran, so you do see a hope here, and you said if you can change, we can change. But in light of the deadly consequences of what's going on in Iran,
yes.
Geographically, where do you think could and should such reform start? Because after all, you ended with, and I'm very sorry to hear that, with your own experience in your family in Somalia. Mm-hmm. You yourself are not based in a Muslim majority country. Mm-hmm. So I was just wondering, where do you think this possibility, in terms of which country, which society? And then maybe just to tie the two, Mariam said ex-Muslims open a space for Muslims that, they actually, is that your experience? Because you are, you didn't mention that at all, but you are, if I'm not mistaken, the first trained female imam in Italy.
Yes.
So I can imagine what kind of, I don't know, I would love to hear that.
I take my space.
But is that sort of the kind of, the position that Mariam has, the kind of language, yes. Does that really open more space for you? Or would you rather, how can they, if they want, really to help you and support you in this?
If I understand well, but I think so. The revolution is not reform. I don't like the word reform. The revolution it can begin everywhere, not in a special nation. Every woman, every family, every space of the Muslim space is, is a good to start a revolution. So, and beginning to, in the family culture and the boys' education. If you normally said, okay, educated the woman, you can have, more freedom, empowerment, something like that. But I think now we can change the things, and as women, we can start to educate our boys, okay? Our husbands, our friends. It's not a problem, the marriage or not marriage. And I think it's necessary to have an alliance between the Muslim and non-Muslim, Jewish, Christian, and something like that. We have a necessity to do one thing. There is a special experience. The Quran mentions slavery, for example. No? If you have a slavery, you can marry it for woman, but you can have a slavery, woman slavery, etc., etc. And when we said the Islamic country is observed the Sha'iriyah, in the Sha'iriyah there is a slavery, but no in actual constitution, Islamic constitution, you don't have the word slavery. Slavery is your right because you are Muslim, okay? So what's happened? They suspend the word slavery, so we can make the same thing. We can, start to move in that direction. If we see that the things is not, good for our contemporary society, we can suspend the verses of Quran, and we take a time to reconnect, a re-elaboration, a reinterpret the Quran in the contemporary way, because the Quran in every era has changed or has a new interpretation. They take other interpretations. So Quran is not monolithic. Quran is flexible, because the men are flexible. okay? And this is the history of Islam. So I'm sorry if you understand, but I can, re-explain. I think the space with no-Muslims or atheists or unbeliever or Christian or Jewish is normal. I want to talk with that person. And I have my space open for Mariam, also a person like that. I'm not prejudiced, absolutely. I'm a free person because I feel my spirituality is free. Because in the Quran, you have some things that you can use for your freedom. Okay, I just worked for 20 years in Italy for the LGBT Muslim groups, young Muslim groups, and the old Muslim like me said, no, it's haram. No, absolutely, this is you can't talk with them. You say to these guys or these girls that LGBT is a very, haram thing. You are out of Islam. What can I do in that sense? I just start to offer the iftar, for example. During the Ramadan, I take the group and I said, okay, we made the iftar. If you feel Islamic, please pray with me. So in that sense, they just have, a calm situation, psychology strength, and if you see the Quran, for example...
Mariam, I'm sorry, did you invite both the LGBT groups and those within your community who oppose your dialogue with them together?
Yes, because I put together the young people, not the old people, and said, okay, he is a homosexual, she is a lesbian, you are heterosexual, okay, eat. Iftar is iftar, okay? And I do this for 20 years, so it's normal. A very special group, and I think we can do this without fear. Because the Quran don't tell me that I kill the homosexual person. Absolutely not. No, there is no words that said homosexual in Quran. But in the society, yes. In the Muslim society, yes. Before the colonization era, there are many Khalifa that have, for example, a boyfriend, man boyfriend, or the queen had a special relationship with other women. And there are in the poetry, in Islamic literature, many poems for the lover.
In the Ottoman Empire.
Yes. They don't say man lover or woman lover, lovers, oh my lover. We know that it's a man or it's a woman. So in the Quran, if we don't have homosexual, why now you can use this to kill and to, compulsory in a bad situation the young people. So we have freedom movements, and we just as Muslim work with the change of society. This is very important. In other ways, if we can do this, we just kill our religion. We just kill our identity. We just kill our culture. Because the Islamic, okay, you say Muhammad, for example, married a young woman. It's true. It's true. But if you see the situation, the marriage between men and young women, it was normal in Europe, for example. It was normal in every culture. I say this like anthropological. I mean, not. I have no prejudice about this. I mean, I have no bad feelings about this. So this is normal in that society. Now we can accept when you say, if Quran said, okay, you beat your wife, in Arabic, that word beat, it's meaning many things. Why did they use beat to beat your wife? Because it's a power man. Beat is far away. You go in this divorce. Mm-hmm. In Arabic, beat have a sense of divorce. So they use beat your wife. So this is that. What I say is, if you interpret her with the male vision, the beat is to beat. When we talking about the qawamun is the same for the man and for the woman in the marriage situation. The qawamun is not I am under you because I am under Allah, not under my husband. Mm-hmm. Absolutely not. Mm-hmm. Okay, so this is the tradition, the traditional culture in that area, because when we're talking about the Islam, we're talking about the Arabic culture. But the Islam is not only Arabic culture. Islam is Africa, is Indonesia, is Asia, is now is Europe. I mean, is an international, mondial religion. So the predominance is, when we're talking about the Islam, we just figure that, okay, hijab, he's a bear, he's speaking in Arabic. For example, I use the Somali language for Islam, not Arabic language. I know that Turkish use the Turkish language for yes, I know. I went in, not for to read the Quran, for interpreter, okay? I use the Quran, both Somali and in Arabic. There is Iranian and Arabic, okay? So every country has his specific language to read, interpret, to understand the Arabic language. But the culture is not Arabic.
So yes, you know what? Just in the interest of time, because I know that you want to respond. Let's put it this way, because it's just so I want to take questions from the audience. Sorry, can you hold that? Yeah, and then keep it. Maybe incorporate that with your response, because I do want to. Okay. And Marianne, is that okay for you?
No, it's just one. I want just to close my words. I don't deny what is in the Quran. I'm not a hypocrite. I know what is in the Quran. Okay? This is not a problem for me. Yeah. But we can suspend. I mean, if I can accept the pedophilia or something like that, not because they say it in Quran or the life of Muhammad. No. Now, in these years, the pedophilia is a crime. And the pedophilia is a crime for the Muslim. For the mothers of Muslim, or for fathers of Muslim, or so, people with this faith. The pedophilia is crime. The violence against the woman is crime. The MGF is crime. Stop.
Mm-hmm. So I'll take these two questions together. Please introduce yourself and keep your questions brief, sorry. And then...
Thank you. Thank you. And thank you for your presentations. I'm Amin, international law teacher and civil society activist. So actually, it's not questions, but it's kind of trying to interact with your presentations. First of all, you talked about Islamophobia and Islamism and Islam. Me, as a civil society activist, I would not use the word Islamophobia, but rather use the word discrimination against Muslims, discrimination against, for example, Christians, against Jews, because for me, human rights protect individuals and not a concept, because a concept is abstract. You see that I can criticize Islam. I can say Islam is a lie, Christianity is a lie, or any other Buddhism, any other religion. But the problem with some religious countries is that you cannot criticize Islam because they preserve the concept, not the individuals. So maybe we'd rather use discrimination against individuals, but not against a religion. For the second presentation, I guess even if you said that the Quran interpretation is flexible and will take into consideration economic, social, political contexts, but what about hadith? What about what the Prophet said? There are many hadith which are contradictory, and whenever you go to religion men to tell them this contradiction, their answer is, no, this hadith is da'if, it is weak. So what hadith are we going to apply here? And are we going to follow Quran for the situation of the poor women, the victims of Iran, or the hadith, the Quran? It's absurd. You can't understand. So, and then you said there's a difference between.
This will be your last one.
Yeah. So you talked about Islamic law versus Western law. There is no such division. I'm sorry, because there is positive law and religious law. So I guess, you said it evolved. You mentioned the example of England. Yeah, most of the countries evolved in terms of positive law. But I'm sorry, Islamic law or, I don't know, religious law in general, it did not evolve. And that's why in many Arab Muslim countries, women are suffering, LGBTQ++ are suffering, etc. Thank you.
Thank you. Melinda, here. Yeah.
My name is Koray. Hello. I would also like to thank the speakers. I have a question to each of the speakers. Maybe I start with Ms. Speaker 2, because it kind of incorporates with the last question that was asked. Actually, no, Ms. Speaker first, sorry. You said that in Western countries, law has evolved also in the sense of like enlightenment. In the Islamic countries, it hasn't this well. Those countries have mostly been colonialized. So I was wondering, what is your opinion on how decolonialization could be, and just like supporting democracy in these countries generally could give way to less. Sorry.
Less repression against women.
Less repression of women in general, but also allow, I don't know, religion still to happen, because we have this like division. We sketch this division between enlightenment and religion, theocracy and democracy, and so on. So how and we were talking about the possibility of an Islamic democracy. Is that even possible? And what role plays the decolonialization in this creation would be my question to speak.
To Maryam Namazi.
Exactly.
Now to Mariam Ismail. Okay.
Exactly. Hello. In your work with LGBT in Italy, I haven't read the entire Quran, but reading a little bit, I have the sense that it gives a very binary gender idea of men and women existing. Where do you see queer people and non-binary people in this end? And how can these people find support in Islam and be Muslims authentically?
Mm-hmm. So Maria will stay with you.
Okay, so I'd just also like to make a few points. One is I think that the Quran is inflexible. It is unchangeable. I think generally the Bible is. The Bible hasn't got edition number 2,000,001. It's the same Bible. You've got the Old Testament, the New Testament, that's it. You've got the Torah. You've got the Quran. Those are inflexible. They're unchangeable. What changes is us. And I think it's then what we as 21st century human beings say is lives worthy of the 21st century, where pedophilia is not allowed, sex slavery is not allowed. And so I think that is the key to where we can reach common ground, which is that in secular societies, as a minimum precondition, and also we have so much human rights, women's rights, LGBT rights, sort of gains that have been made as a result of progressive social and political movements. And those are what we base our societies on now. And I think that's why when we talk about Islam being a lived experience for Muslims, that's why my parents don't want to kill me even though I'm an apostate. And my grandfather was a mullah, but my parents love me still. I'm not shunned for being an ex-Muslim. And that is the lived experience of a lot of people. If all Muslims believed, or all Christians believed in the Bible and Quran, we would all be dead. You would be dead for being a female imam. You know, you would be dead for having iftar with LGBT. Obviously, a lot of people don't think that, and I think that's the distinction. So I think there's a difference between how people live a belief versus what that belief is in its texts. And I do think that the Quran is misogynist. I know you want to, you know, you speak about leave the hadith out, leave Islamic jurisprudence out, let's just look at the Quran. But as Dilek mentioned, there is, you know, Surah Al-Nisa, which says men are in charge of women, women who are disobedient. Now you're saying don't beat them, but women who are disobedient. Everything from family law, inheritance, child custody, divorce, limits right to divorce. Men can say talaq 3 times, women don't have that right. The concept of male guardianship, all of these things come from those laws and ways of controlling women. The people of Lut, that is in the Quran talking about gay people and what needs to be done to them. So I think anyway, this conversation is an impossible conversation because you have a right to your beliefs, I have a right to mine. And I think this is how people in our families, we talk, we discuss, you know, we don't cut each other's heads off. And I think that's important for people to see that it's possible to disagree and still have respect for each other. And, you know, I'm very happy to be sitting here with you. But I think, you know, from my perspective, reform isn't possible. You know, you talk a lot about reform, but what is actual reform? That a disobedient woman shouldn't be hit, you should divorce her. That's not good enough, in my opinion. You know, because we live in the 21st century and women have much more rights than that. Or your comment about the hijab versus the veil. I find that, I don't find that enough, you know, because I think if you look at the question, of course adult women have the right to wear the veil or the hijab if they want, but I think we also have to ask this fundamental question, why are women supposed to wear the veil? Because an unveiled woman is the source of fitna in society. She can't shake hands. Why is there gender segregation? I had a debate with the head of the Muslim Association of Britain, you know, who said that you have to have stoning because otherwise, if you don't have stoning, people, isn't it better to have it was a discussion on gender segregation. He said, isn't it better to have gender segregation than have the sexes segregate, there'll be adultery, and then we have to stone people to death? Isn't gender segregation better? These are not enough for me, in my perspective. And finally, I just want to comment on a question you asked last, which I didn't have a chance to ask, and then, sorry, go to yours as well, on this thing about how heartbreaking it is what's happening in Iran. I think it's not just in Iran that it's happening, and I'm not sure why you have that impression. I mean, I think in Iran, there's a lot of resistance. I think that's not heartbreaking. I think that's inspirational, and it has inspired the world. But if you look at there are 13 countries that punish apostasy and blasphemy with death. It is not just in Iran. In Morocco, a young woman's been arrested and given several years sentence for blasphemy. In Egypt, we have ex-Muslims who are imprisoned for atheism. In Saudi Arabia, Raif Badawi has been given a 10-year sentence, and now that he's been released, he's got 10-year ban on travel just for saying that he thinks liberalism is good and not secularism. In Mali, musicians are killed for playing instruments. We see what Daesh did to their sex slaves. Why do you have this impression that it's only in Iran? Obviously, it's not. We're not having a theoretical discussion. We can see very clearly what's taking place across the globe. And finally, you ask a question of whether she's comfortable or how can I help her? Why should I be helping her? Do I not have rights as an ex-Muslim?
I didn't put it that way.
No, but that is exactly what you said. You said, well, you know, she says she can say what you want. How do you feel? How can she help you? That's exactly the words you used. And again, this is the narrative that we're faced with every day. We are a problem. No, we are not. We are asking for our rights. And that is the right to speak, the right to live as atheists, as freethinkers, as blasphemers and apostates. And the question should really be, what are Muslims doing to support a minority, even if they are a minority within a minority? Nothing. Every day, ex-Muslims speak out in defense of Muslims. How often do you hear Muslims speak out in defense of ex-Muslims? Every day, we say we're opposed to the right to veil, but we're opposed to the veil, but people have the right to veil. How many women came out? Veiled women came out and removed their veil in solidarity with women in Iran dying because they don't want to be veiled. So I think there is this context and narrative that constantly sees us as the problem. When we criticize Islam and Islamism, no, Islam is the problem and Islamism is the problem. And finally, on your question on, on colonialism and I think if I understood carefully, I think colonialism helped to create the sort of divisions we see in the world today. And even if you look at all their interventions, it has been in defense of bringing religion. British troops have helped to set up Sharia courts in Afghanistan. That is their role always, is to encourage religious laws, to encourage the religious right movement, because dividing and rule is their best and most helpful option, and they've done it in Western societies as well. They segregate the Muslim community, and then they put sheikhs and mullahs to run that community. Muslim organizations, why? We are citizens before the law, equal citizens. Why must we be divided into communities and the state have no responsibility towards us because we're considered Muslims? In Britain, we have Sharia courts supported by the British government that discriminates and encourages violence against women.
Because they have the money, honey. They have the money. Sorry, I just answered. The problem is very simple for me. Why they do this? Why the Muslim community, the Ummah, I don't like Ummah. I like the person, because I'm not Ummah. I am Maryam. Okay? So I, Maryam, like a Muslim, if I fight, and I want to fight with you, because your right is my right, and my right is your right, okay? But when I stand up and say it as Muslim, I am with Maryam, because in my Quran, I have just a single verse, very important verse, La ikraha fi din, with there no constriction in the religion, okay? I can constrict you to say, okay, say this or say that, okay? But if I am Muslim, okay, I just fight for your freedom. Because this is Quran words. La ikraha fi din. Okay? But if I say this, I just kill. Somebody kill me. Because I have no money. I have no power. I am not a politician. I am a simple activist. You see, this is our problem. We are not in network. They are in network. They just work from, 40, 15 years after the colonization. Okay? They colonize the colonization because they buy the colonizer. They put their money to build the mosque here in Europe, okay? The same thing it's very difficult in our country. If you are in Afghanistan, you haven't, a church, because we are poor. But if we have, for example, the Western country to decide, I put the money to support this kind of idea, because it's my idea, it's a human idea, not because it's Western idea, it's human idea, it's human right idea, Okay, we have no absolutely, support from the Western feminists. Okay, because the Western feminists, I think in 20 years I said, no, she has a right to hijab. Okay, of course, she has a right to hijab. And Mariam has a right to not wearing hijab? No, because you are, rich, or you are a minority. They are majority, and they want to put the hijab. You are the minority, because the Muslim wants hijab. Why they chose this kind of version? Because we have billions and billions and billions of dollars in Western country, from Qatar, from Emirates, from everywhere. Okay, they just buy our city. They buy our country. We are poor, of course they buy us, but they buy the Western. So they use the mentality, the colonial mentality, and they recolonize, okay, the Western country. There is La Battaglia di Lepanto. I don't know how to say in English. Okay, okay. The Muslim has this, idea. This situation between the Christian and the Muslim. Okay, Lepanto. We want to have a Lepanto in Europe. And the European doesn't care because the secularism, because the identity is not clear. The Ummah is clear, not the Ummah, the politician of Ummah. They have a clear, objective, but not the Europe, or not the Western country. This is our problem. For your question, I'm sorry, you can repeat because I just...
the LGBT...
in Italy?
No, in Quran, that was the question, right? To what extent...
Maybe I'll just repeat. In Quran, because in your presentation I saw gender issues or something like this.
Oh, binary.
So in Quran, the gender binarity is sketched very clear as a man and woman.
Yes.
What shall I do with my life? The mom who works with the LGBT community, where do you see the space for
Mariam, we have exceeded time. I think is that okay for you?
Within Islam, and how can these people have faith without authentically?
Yeah, the faith is personal. It's not because Imam said you have a faith. If you have a faith, you can have the space for your faith. Okay, the spiritual, your spirituality, etc., etc.
Sorry.
In the community, the community is another situation. When I said Ummah, is important to be in the Ummah, or is important to be a Muslim? This is the question. When I say that I just discussed with the young people, is important to be the Ummah in the Ummah? I mean, I don't know what is the Ummah, okay? Because Ummah is not red, white, it's not nothing. It's a word in community. What kind of community? You have a choice. If you want to be a Muslim, you can be a Muslim. Simple. If the Ummah said you are not Muslim, you can repeat who are the Ummah, who represent. We don't have Pope. We don't have religion hierarchy in Islam. It's simple. It depends that what you, your idea. If you are Muslim, I can close the door of mosque because you are LGBT, absolutely or queer. Or what do you want to do or to be? Because from you and Allah, it's not possible to have an imam. You are directly your relationship with Allah, not with imam and then to Allah. No. This is, for me, it's very simple.
Mm-hmm. I'm afraid we have to close because we already ran out of time. I mean, I'm really ambivalent. I see Melinda wanting to give. I don't know what to...
Thank you. Thank you, because this is for women and only 2 men were allowed to make questions.
You hadn't raised your hand before.
So I appreciate it.
All right, can I just... You had not raised your hand
Thank
before.
you. So as a lesbian, I am very much into the rights of LGBT because these are based on reality and not on imaginations or beliefs. So nobody is helping lesbians, for example, in Islam or in Iran, when they say they're lesbians or when men say they're gay. So they have to transition, yeah? So they have to get castrated because they're non-binary or because they are these kind of new neoliberal identities that go very much against homosexuals like me. So I was wondering, how come can we discuss this on these terms of including LGBT when the T is actually going against homophobia?
Yes.
So it's homophobia.
Against the L.
So how are we having a serious conversation mixing all of these concepts, right? Because if a man believes he's a woman, I'm, as a lesbian, know he's a man. So one belief is Islam, another belief is this gender thing. So how are we having this conversation on the same terms between religion and this kind of ideology that comes from neoliberalism? This is my question.
Okay, I think that would be a question. Yeah.
Yes.
Okay, all right. Okay.
Ich kann nicht so viel sprechen, weil ich habe ein bisschen Probleme. Zuerst, we know all the Iran regime, they have with Islam not contact. They killed the Syrian people with Bashar Assad, the dictator Bashar Assad. They killed the Yemen people with Saudi Arabia and Emirates. What do you want from women? But I cannot speak. Please, this is here.
So let me see. The mullahs of Iran have offended Islam, and Islam has offended nothing, and Islam has nothing to do with offending women. The prophetic hadiths that you refer to, you whom? No, is wrong.
Okay.
Islam promised women more rights than men.
Well, I mean, I think well, you know, the issue is.
Because somebody who asks a question and then
leaves.
Sorry, you don't want to. Yeah.
Eid Mubarak. Islam gives more rights to women. Well, we have quite a lot of experience to show otherwise. On the issue of LGBT, I mean, I do understand, and I do agree with you to some extent that there are transgender activists that are erasing women and women's spaces and using the transgender ideology to violate women's rights. On the other hand, you have to understand that in many of our societies, we have transgender people, for whatever reason, whether they're forced, that's the only option they have, but they're really gay, or, you know, whatever personal decision they make, who are persecuted and under huge amounts of threats and pressure. And so it is very important, from my perspective, to defend LGBT in Iran, in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Saudi Arabia, you know, whilst also very clearly defending.
A white person personifying a black person is a bad thing. We learned that this is racism. Now, why men personifying women is not sexism? And why is that allowed? And why do you think that these men that suffer homophobia, should be keeping personifying women? Because it's not that they dress as they want, it's that they say they're women. Why, as a lesbian, I have to call a man a woman? Why?
Well, don't if you want to.
Yeah, I think that's a very important question, but I think it's not specific to you know, Islam or I mean, yeah, and very much a Western debate, I think. Yeah. I think you're responding more to a question that was raised rather than what the speaker said earlier. So, Marianne?
I think this is a problem with all the countries and all the culture and all the tradition. I think the religion is not important for this, but the laws, the positive laws that doctor said, the positive law, the law of the country, okay, is the responsibility to have, I mean, coexistent between your idea and other ideas. For me, for example, as a feminist, because I'm a feminist, of course, I think there is an attack from the man to the woman, okay? And they try to be like a woman, but the woman, they have not, I mean, the same strength for the transition, I mean, no? Because this is really a complicated situation. And I just looking for the position, and I hope that we have, I mean, the point of contact for that you ask for respect about your problem, the issue.
Well, thank you. I'm afraid, I mean, we're already run out of time by 25 minutes, but I just really regret that we're ending it because there's just so many. I mean, I had questions prepared, new questions that rose from the discussion, and I hope that there will be future opportunity to continue.
Yes.
This particular, actually, maybe the two of you will continue discussing this at other platforms. Thank you very much, everyone, for being here, for staying with us, and thank you very much, Maryam Namazi and Maryan Ismail, for being with us. Good evening.
Thank you.